So, but there's always stories, right, behind boxers. Everybody gets into the ring for a reason, or and then they take lessons out of it. So that's the reason I want to start this series of podcasts. Do you remember the story the way Andy told it? Did he tell it accurately?
I do. Let me preface it with this, though. Whether it be one fight or 100 fights, if you've ever stepped in the square circle, you're a boxer. So, Clint, you get credit for being a fighter, brother. So, you know what I mean? So there's only one way to get insight into what you feel in that 2 or 3 minute round, and that's by stepping in there, and you've done that. So you deserve credit for that. Yeah, the story is pretty accurate. What happened was I had just gotten out of the Army, retired from the Army after 26 years in 2003. And I boxed in the Army, and then I coached in the Army. And my coaching experience in the Army is a little different than in the civilian sector. You know, if I wanted to put on a show or attend a show, the sports and recs folks would take care of everything for me. So I interfaced with Andy's dad, Joe, and everybody knows Joe. Joe's a legend.
Well, look here real quick.
Yeah.
Look what that guy said. 3 ugly guys on the screen. Can you
Well, now it's 4, right?
Yeah.
Do the math on that one, right?
All right, so you knew Joe. I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir.
Everybody knows Joe's a legend, and Joe guided me in the right direction, and we ended up showing up at the Chattanooga Golden Gloves, which is now defunct, but it was a good event. It was a great event, and we had a little discrepancy. And we're all knowledgeable, so you know, Andy's like I would say, you know, typically in boxing, the general rule had been that you know, all of the guys that were knowledgeable and creditable coaches were typically in their 50s or beyond, right? So Andy's a young, prolific, good scientific coach at the time that had a lot of success, and but he was holding the tournament, he was coaching, he was doing a whole lot of things, so he was frustrated. And I came up to him about one very small thing. I came to Joe about it. And it was a rule that if you entered the tournament and the first bell and a match was made on paper and the bell rang for the first match, that was a made match and you won by default. And I wanted my guy to get brought up in the ring and his hand to be held up. That was probably the furthest thing from Andy and Joe's mind at the time. And they indicated that to me and by some hand gestures, and Joe spit in my face and backs, and of course, and it got heated. And I went after Andy. And fast forward to today, man, we're inseparable. Me, Joe, and Andy are like, we've done a lot of things together for the kids. As I think about it, I could get emotional talking about it, but it's just an amazing relationship. It's just amazing. If you'd have been witness to what happened that day, you probably would have been on the edge of calling the sheriff's department. And then fast forward to today, to watch how God developed that relationship and has put us each in each other's lives and how much of an impact we've had on kids. It's just amazing, man.
Well, that's a good story. And I know, you know, Andy and I know Joe. I'll say this more about Joe than Andy because I've seen it. I can't picture Joe getting sideways with people.
You just can't see it, right? I'm an emotional creature.
He is. Listen, if Joe's watching, he's going to get upset now. We're throwing him under the bus.
He's
so
a witty guy.
I'll tell you a funny story, and this is where we'll just launch into the story side of it because I'm going to let you tell everybody how you got into boxing. But my dad was in the Army, and he did not serve 26 years, but he did serve 3 terms in Vietnam, 3 tours in Vietnam. And he tells the story when they were at, I guess it was base camp, they had the newbie come in, right? A new guy. You could tell by his hair, how he was wearing his clothes. Well, they had boxing on the base, and my dad liked to box. And my dad was pretty good box. My dad's just flat out he's the best dad, toughest man on planet Earth, but he's just mean. I mean, he can just be flat out mean, and everybody knows it. He's also can be very loving, right? So he's in the ring, and this new guy comes and sits down, and they're going at it. And Dad's got a little reputation for being the boxer. And the guy goes, "Hey, can I jump in the ring and can I get a little sparring going on?" Dad's like, "Yeah, come on. It's all right. We're going to set him straight." He's new. He calls me Bubba. He goes, "Bubba, I had never been knocked down." He goes, "Lasted about 30 seconds. I got knocked down 3 times.
Wow.
He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "So we wrapped it up. He sparred with some other guys. We were all leaving, and he had this jacket that they let him keep, and he put it back on. And on the back of it, it said Minnesota State Golden Gloves champ. 1966, 1967, and 1968. He said, I knew right then that there's a new king boxer in the camp. So it taught him some good lessons. So do me a favor. I read a cool article about you, and I'm not going to try to regurgitate it. I'd rather you tell me. What got you into boxing? Because you started at a young age. What got you into boxing? How did your life pull you that direction?
So similar to some of the kids that myself and the Smiths are involved in their lives, you know, I come from a broken house, a challenging household where, you know, I was a single parent for the longest time until I was about 14 years old. And there was a couple of things that impacted my life that allows me to be here today, in my opinion, is one that was the interaction with a bus ministry. It was a bus ministry from a predominantly, and I have to say, predominantly white church. They used to come up on our street in our holler and pick the kids up. And I always tell the kids it's the donut story. And they, you know, up north they had in, you know, West Virginia, if you can call it the north, they had when instead of Krispy Kreme, they had Dunkin' Donuts, and they'd get the leftover Dunkin' Donuts that morning. And because all the little poor kids were hungry, so they'd lure us on the bus with the donuts, and we'd get free donuts, and we go to church, and we got the word of God, you know, and so that impacted us. And there was a family called the Gandy family that I'm still trying to find. Spent a lot of time with me, my brothers, and my sisters, and that impacted it. Additionally, I had a shop teacher named Mr. Reeves, and Mr. Reeves was a Vietnam vet, very respected, and he was a Taekwondo guy, and he claimed to be a boxing guy, but he wasn't, you know. So him and my stepdad came into my life later, combined with you know, that, you know, my stepdad used to take us out on this concrete slab with some old Kmart gloves, wasn't a Walmart back then, and beat the brakes off of us every Saturday. And so I started studying, and I went to the Boys and Girls Club and became a boxer, and remained pretty disciplined. Fought a couple of state Golden Glove championships, and ultimately came in the Army a long time ago, back in 1977. When I joined the Army, my intent was, I had no intent of boxing or doing anything, but in basic training, you know, me and the guys found this old guy. He was from California. His name was Charlie Ortega. He came all the way from LA. He was a former gang member, and he was a boxer. And we were bunk mates, and not in the literal sense. But I recently found Charlie over the last year or so on Facebook. It's a pretty good reunion. But Charlie Ortega and I used to play around with our hands a lot in what we call the square, and the drill sergeant seen it. The drill sergeant didn't give us an ultimatum. He basically said, he didn't give us an option. He says, they're having a boxing tournament and you guys are entering. And there were basically 3 weight classes. There were lightweight, middleweight, and heavyweight. And so I was in the lightweight division, and I won that. I left there and went to Fort Stewart, Georgia, and joined the Fort Stewart boxing team, boxed there, made it to All-Army one time, and then went to Germany. And a funny story with Germany is I got there, I won what was called the USRA Championship, which was Armed Forces Europe Championship, which was huge then because they had over 1 million soldiers in Europe at the time. You know, it was the height of the Cold War. And so winning that championship was significant because if you looked at the amateur rankings back then, probably 2 to 3 of the top 10 were Army. And out of that 2 or 3, 1 or 2 would come from Europe. And so Europe was pretty strong. So went there and then went to All-Army. The problem was when I made it to All-Army, the coach at Fort Bragg was a tough guy. His name was Coach Grant. He was legendary then, before Kenny Adams. And I got there, and my unit sent me off with a big parade and celebration and everything. And then it was a day-long travel there. So now we're talking about 2 days I've been gone. I got there. The first day of camp, I'd done something wrong. I was late. And he sent me back home. So on the third day, with 1 day trek back, 4 days, I'm back to my unit. It was the most embarrassing thing ever.
Oh, wow.
I know I took the long way around with it, but that's how I ended up. And then I had an auto accident in Germany in '88. I know, as you were, '83. I say '88 because '88 would have been my promising year to make the Olympic team. But that auto accident caused a scar right here that was heavily keloid. It had real bad scar tissue at the time, had cuts on my head. And I tried to come back to boxing after that. My coach, at that time, was Coach Kenny Adams, legendary Coach Kenny Adams. He told me, he said, it's just not going to work. And he sent me back to my unit. I vowed at that point to never coach. I thought coaching was a sissy thing. You know, I just wasn't going to coach. It's just not going to do it. And so I got to a unit, another unit in Germany, and the commander realized, he said, I got this guy. And this is another funny story, an interesting story. I got this guy in the unit, and he keeps going up to these events, and he's getting his tail whooped every time he goes up. And I think it's coaching. Will you help him out? I said, I'll help him out. It's technically not coaching. And so I coached that and had some moderate success, and I liked it. And so that guy that I coached, his name is Coach Joe White. He moved to Huntsville, retired from the military in Huntsville, and he's an assistant coach in my gym. That was over 40 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Interesting story, huh?
It's very interesting. What do you like about boxing? What did you like about it?
The most I like the competitive aspect of it, but I like perseverance. I like the aspect that it teaches perseverance. No matter what your background it was, or where you are on the socioeconomic tier ladder, no matter what, boxing teaches you that you can overcome adversity and prevail at the end. There's nothing greater than taking a little kid. He may have I'm getting emotional talking about you, but he may be mechanically, and Andy can testify this, mechanically, maybe the most unsound kid on the planet, overweight, can't get out of his own way. And then he has some moderate success, just moderate success in the ring. He may not win the whole fight. He just wins a round, or he lands a good punch. He's persevered. And once you teach that kid that, they have this old adage that says, sport imitates life. And so once they learn that in sport, it can be transposed to life as well. I'm behind at the job, or it could be racial, it could be, gender specific. It could be anything, a learning disability, anything. But once you learn to persevere, once you taste that and your brain secretes that dopamine that first time, you become addicted.
Oh, I like it. Well, and two, I would say, because I've talked with Andy and Joe enough and been around YCAP enough, me and Andy were having some conversations off the air about how it's important of what you do, what Andy does, and what Joe did and still does. But a lot of these kids have never had anybody actually invest in them. I mean, boxing is important, but if you get a kid that they may suck at boxing, they may never be good at boxing. Yeah. But it's the fact that they've got somebody spending time with them that cares enough and showing them something, just that alone, that I'm worth someone else's time, that can be life-changing.
Yeah, it can be. The return on that could be many, 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 many years down the road. I mean, and Andy and Joe can testify to that. It's just people might tune in and look at us and say, hey, that looks fun and rewarding, and hey, I'd like to do that. But I tell you, man, if you attend one of those summer camps with us, or spend a day down at YCAP with Andy, or come to my gym, it can be challenging.
I've seen some days down there.
And there are often times that you just have to get on your knees and ask the Lord, am I doing the right thing? Give me a sign. Yeah. Because I'm telling you, sometimes it looks like it's never going to come around. And then that one kid does something that's remarkable, right? Turns their life around, becomes a productive citizen, comes back to the gym to help coach, You know, Andy's got a ton of stories like that where guys look like they just wasn't gonna make it, and now they're involved in the program and they're mentoring kids. So, yeah, it's very rewarding. But again, it's not easy. It is not easy.
One of the couple things that I've brought up with Andy before, but I'd love to get your take on it. And Andy, you can jump in here anytime. A couple things. So first, I will just say something that I appreciate now about boxers, and Andy's heard this so much, he's going to laugh, but it's out of just pure respect. He's probably going to roll his eyes. I will tell you one of the scaredest things that are not scaredest, one of the most unique feelings ever is when you're in the middle of the ring and they tell you to go back to your corners and everybody else gets out of the ring.
Yeah.
And you're looking across the
scene, right?
I told Andy when I went out to Kansas City for the ringside stuff, I remember as the first time I did, I remember looking across the ring and thinking, what in the hell am I doing? What is even this for? You know, it's a great feeling, but it also gives you that sense of accomplishment, win or lose. Yeah. I did something that a lot of people may not be willing to do. It's a weird feeling, but the lessons though, that I talked to Andy about that I think relate to life is one of the very first things that I noticed was how important it was to listen to your corner man. We'll talk about training in a second. I'm going to ask you a little bit about training here in a minute. Mm-hmm. But in the fight, right, you're out there and you're in the middle of it. I can see stuff, but there's a perspective outside the ring from your coach and trainer. They can see who's dropping what. They can see things that you can't see. And so they give you this break and you go sit in your corner. And if you can hear the voices over your breathing, if you're in good shape, which I was not. So I heard nothing except my breathing, which was really fun times. But if you listen to the corner man, they're going to give you perspective that can help you. I translated that immediately to business and to life, because there are people that have a perspective that they're back here and they can give me some advice. And if I really want to be successful, you got to learn to listen to other people, right? Mm-hmm. The second thing is, and then I'll let you jump in. Second thing is sparring people better than you so you can get better. I personally have done that because most people were better than me. It's not fun to actually intentionally go, I need to spar Larry, who's going to beat the dog crap out of me for the next 30 to 45 minutes, but I know it's going to make me better. That's a different mindset too, to get kids in the habit of, right? So there's two lessons. What's your take on those things?
So on the first one though, yeah, that's really, really insightful statement that the corner has that perspective. There in our LBC, our local boxing commission, there are a lot of great coaches, Scott Vance, but and I don't want to, leave any of them out, but to exclude me and Andy is one that Andy and I have had battles, right? And so when you watch two guys that have been around and that know the sport, it can be really intriguing to set me and Andy sit there on opposite sides of the ring, best friends. But as George, but I know this is not a word. I just like saying it because George, but as we the strategery involved in, working the corner. So Andy has this thing that he picked up, and it's a great thing that Andy promotes southpaws, right? Even if you're not a southpaw, there's a lot of advantages to having southpaw fighters, right? And so in my gym, to combat Andy, it's we're 1 and 2 probably in the LBC, and so we debate about who's 1 and who's 2. If you ask our buddy Chattanooga's YCAP is 1 all the time, right? It's just,
are you talking about Chad Henley?
Yeah, Chad. Oh. But anyway, so. It's really interesting to watch us play the chess game from the corner, because in the most cases, the athletes, we've done everything we needed to do in the gym, and the athletes are pretty evenly matched when Andy and I meet up. So otherwise we wouldn't have made the bout. That, the matchmaking is critical too, but it's interesting to watch me and Andy work, especially southpaw versus orthodox in the corner. So yeah. That perspective that you speak of from the corner and taking instructions is very important. And like I tell my daughter all the time, I said, the biggest thing that I could have done as a child, your age, or as a young adult, is listen to my parents or listen to my elders, because they've already done it. All the mistakes have already been made, right? It's like going through college. I wish somebody would have gave me all the answers to the test. You know, the answers to the test are there in life if you listen to your elders, right? You know, and really it's not a case of picking the wrong or right answer. It's just picking the best answer, you know. So it's the same parallel. Again, we draw that parallel to boxing in life. And then as it relates to sparring somebody that's better than you, you know, the Bible verse, iron sharpens iron, comes out. So there's two things about that. One is they're more advanced than you in the skill set, but the other one is you're not really a threat to them. So I like to match a more experienced fighter with my inexperienced fighter, because if I put two inexperienced fighters in there, all I'm going to do is test their heart. They're going to close their eyes and go for it. But if I put my experienced fighter in there, he can set back and catch a jab, and you know, he can do the things that, okay, now I want the inexperienced boxer to work on just their jab, and I want you to catch the jab, don't attack, right? And so it helps advance the skills of the inexperienced boxer without them being threatened, without it going into a flurry, you know. So
well, I'll ask Andy about the southpaw in just a second. I will say this though: I've sparred many guys that would say this to me, "Dude, I'll go as hard or as light as you want to."
There you go. There
it is, and I've said that to other people,
right?
Have
the ability to do that, right?
They do. And so here's what happens, at least with me. Now I've done this for a little bit. I've sparred guys that I've said that to. My buddies don't want to go in and spar, and I've said to them, "I'll go as hard as light as you want to. If they're going to go hard, I'll go hard." But so there's a few guys I was better prepared than. But what I found is those guys that say that, if you're ever sparring somebody and they actually say that, listen to them.
Yeah.
Because if you decide to go hard, you're going to see this. You ready? See that smile?
Yeah.
Even with the mouthpiece in. I remember I sparred one guy and I just got on this flurry. I was feeling good, you know, and he just started grinning. And next thing you know, I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah. So we're going to take it. We're going to take it back.
And you fell into it. Yeah.
Yes, I did. I fell into it. Absolutely. Andy, what is the southpaw thing? Why do you like southpaws?
Man, it's really, you know what hooked me when I went coaching was the National Silver Gloves, and it's one of my favorite tournaments because it's boxing at the purest stage, right? So the National Silver Gloves takes place every single year. It's only for kids ages 8 to 15, and they had to win their state, and then they win their region, and then they bring these 350 kids ages 8 to 15 out to Kansas City, and they vie for a national championship. And what I found was when the very first time I went, I never will forget this. I saw a kid by the name of Rasheed Warren. He's a 3-time Olympian. He's the only U.S. boxer to ever do it 3 times, and he was southpaw. And I stood there as a 19-year-old young man in awe of this guy, right? And he was southpaw, and for whatever reason, I got it in my head that, you know what, it was so pretty watching him from that stance, and I just took it back, and you know, over the years built on it, and seen the advantages that it has given athletes along the way, and then I also have a theory with it. If you're right-handed and your right hand is dominant, then why not have it out front being your jab, your hook? You know, it's the lead hand. And so, I don't know, not that there's a right way or a wrong way. It's just been something that moment in time as a 19-year-old young man, when I was starting my coaching career, I never will forget that. And it was just one of those things. It's like, I'm going to take that back to the kids.
So, yeah, I a little bit more insight on that is the Cubans do it. The Cubans do it. I mean, the Cubans have some orthodox fighters, but I would say, Andy, you probably know better on the percentage. About 75% of their team typically southpaws.
Yeah.
And there's a thing called it's called the southpaw advantage. And so, most of the fighters you're going to see in the gym and training everywhere are orthodox. Mm-hmm. Step in the ring, and all of a sudden, across the corner or across the ring from using southpaw, it immediately creates challenges. Because the coach starts scrambling. All right, you got to move to your left. You got to keep your left foot on the outside of his, and you got to lead right hand on. It's a whole nother game plan that you got to put together to overcome the advantage that southpaw has. Yeah. Now, the funny thing is, I'm naturally left-handed. Yeah, and because we were hillbillies and nobody knew any better, and people didn't do anything, nobody converted me. I come from an era when there were not a lot of left-handed gloves, so a baseball glove, you just put a right-handed glove up, and so I play baseball right-handed. I do everything. Wow. So my dominant hand was out front.
Larry, you know what's funny about that? I'm left-handed naturally. I write left-handed, but I do everything sports-wise right-handed.
Yeah, I mean, society was biased against left-handers back then.
Yeah.
Not so much today, but back then, and left-handers had to fit in. They picked up the right-handed ways and did the right. My old coach used to say, Coach Santiago said, Larry Bright will knock you out with that left hook. He'll hit you with that right hand, he'll wake you back up.
Well, you know,
I had no power in my backhand, so.
You're right about the Cubans, but there is a percentage, and I did it once before. I can't remember. I have to look it up, but there is a percentage, and it's pretty high of the U.S. Olympians that make the USA team that are southpaw. It's it's interesting. It's interesting dynamic.
It's an advantage, but if you learn to fight a southpaw correctly, you can take that advantage and turn it around as well. You know.
Yeah, no question.
Yeah.
Y'all are about to start talking coaching right here in a minute against each other. What makes a good coach? Andy, let's start with you. What makes a good coach?
To me, man, it's all about adapting. I mean, it's all obviously you gotta love the game, and you gotta love the athlete that you're working with. But I think to me, it's all about how you adapt to your athlete, right? So certain kids are gonna be able to do certain things a certain way, and so if you don't. You've got to be able to adapt to that.
Yeah, I agree. There's two aspects of it. One is the personal aspect of it. You got to be a caring mentor, right? You got to care. And then on the technical side, like Andy said, you got to adapt. And on the adapting part is critical to me because I came up in an era where we had these old wives' tales, right? One was sweating in a room that was over 100 degrees with plastic on and baby oil on. And losing weight. Well, you was losing water weight. You were dehydrating, right? And when you dehydrated every part of your body, your brain, the cerebral fluid in your brain, so it made you more susceptible to concussions. So now we learn that, and USA Boxing is critical on that. But we did that all the way up to the Olympic team. I mean, up and beyond the Olympics, coaches were doing the dehydrating down 5, 6, 7 pounds the way they do it in MMA, right? So we've learned and evolved from that. Also, the thing was that, hey, I was a skinny kid. I was 147 pounds, 6 feet tall. Said, hey, look here, lifting weights slows you down, bulks you up.
Yeah.
Ain't gonna work. The Russians started lifting weights, and the first American coach it was my coach, Kenny Adams. And if you came on his team and you didn't have the muscle mass that he wanted in your leg, he'd send you over to the powerlifting team. So he was the first guy to start lifting weights, made him competitive. He was the last coach successful at the Olympics in '88. Had to have multiple gold medals. So that's two examples of, like Andy said, you got to be flexible, you got to evolve and be scientific. I consider me and Andy to be two scientific coaches. We sit around and talk about the science of boxing, movement, angles, all day long. Either talk about it or argue about it. I tell you, debate, right, Andy? Debate.
That's right.
I got a buddy that posted a meme the other day, and he said he loved boxing because it's one of the few sports they say you don't play.
Yeah.
You don't play. If you play football, you play baseball, you play basketball. Boxing, you don't go, hey, I play boxing. You don't. There's nothing playing about it. I want to switch gears just a little bit, and I've got an echo somewhere. Are you on your phone, Andy?
I am.
I bet is there a hard surface underneath it?
No, it's not doing it anymore.
Oh, okay, cool. If it does it again, I may just ask you to mute it while you're not talking, but it's okay right now. We're good. So I want to switch gears. And Coach Larry, do you have just a couple more minutes with us?
Yeah, absolutely. As long as you need. I'm off today.
Well, what I was going to ask is I love the stories, and I want to keep sharing the stories, but now I want to get into where I get to pick the brains of boxers, like favorite boxers and stuff. And this is what I've asked Andy about in the past. So growing up in the era you grew up in, what's your favorite boxer? Do you have a couple of favorite boxers, Larry?
My favorite boxer, hands down, is Muhammad Ali for a lot of reasons. And one is he was an amazing athlete. I don't think, there's been an athlete. I mean, you got smaller fighters that were faster, naturally faster because they were smaller. But as it relates to fast switch muscle fiber, he's probably the most amazing. And he wasn't, and I'll go out and say it. Anybody who wants to debate this can talk to me offline about it later. But you have athletes that weren't necessarily great technically. Ali coming out wasn't necessarily great technically. He had flaws in his jab. He didn't throw his jab the way me and Andy would teach a jab today. You know, he kind of lay it out, slap you with it.
And he started off low too. A lot of times, it'd be hanging low, and
yeah. And he had a lot of flaws, but he had amazing reflexes and fast twitch muscle fiber. And you know, so that was it. You know, Roy Jones, same way. You know, Roy didn't have a great skill set. You know, later in his career, it exposed itself, but he had amazing fast twitch muscle fiber. Roy could have been a football player, basketball player, you know, kind of like Allen Iverson. You know, he had a lot of fast twitch muscle fiber.
Hey, real quick, is it hard to coach a good athlete like that? Because a lot of times they depend on their athleticism.
Depends on where you get them at. Me and Andy are both drill-based coaches, so it doesn't matter if you want to conform or not. We're going to drill it into you. You're going to do it 500 times a day. It's going to become muscle memory. So if we get you early, like I'll use Deontay Wilder, for example. You know, JD's really tried to drill. Well, so history on that. And Joe Smith, has Joe been on the show?
Okay, real quick. Joe and technology do not always go hand in hand.
So we'll have to send a mentor over there to get Joe, or invite him over to one of our houses. But Joe would be interesting. But yeah, Joe has personal insight in the story I'm about to tell. You know, when we get Deontay at a later stage in life in his boxing career, he's developed muscle memory and a lot of things that he kind of reverts back to kind when he gets in trouble and goes wild. And they tried to drill that out of him at first. JD's people beat Jay up. Oh, he's not again. Jay tried to change Deontay on that. And then later, when he went to Olympic Training Center and Joe Smith was out there and Andy was out there, Bashir Abdullah, the head coach out there, tried to drill him in too as well. The head coach of the Olympic team tried to drill it out of him. And at some point they says, hey, he's got that enabler that neutralizes that right hand. We just gonna ride with it, right? And they fixed his jab. A lot of the skills that you see that he has today that conform to textbook, they came from that time at the Olympic Training Center and with those coaches. But to answer your question, when you get a fighter like that, if you get them early enough in your career and you drill them enough, then you don't have to worry about it. But if you get them later, yeah, it can be hard to change those things. I had a kid by the name of Sergio Rice that had been trained by a karate guy who claimed to be boxing. And by the time I got him, I drilled him to death. And his first round would look amazing. But when he got exhausted, he got tired. And then later, Andy picked him up, tried to. But when he got into those situations where, you know, he was confronted with struggle or hardship in the fight, he'd revert back to kind. And
that's a good lesson for life too, though. It happens to all of us.
Yeah, it is. I mean, yeah. We were talking about something earlier offline. Won't mention what it was, but you know, people's experiences. They taught us this in military leadership school, and it was a very important piece. It's a critical piece to forgiveness, right? If a person's a certain way, they're that way because their life experiences develop their social norms, right? Yeah. And so I'm not saying that you should forgive somebody for being prejudiced or committing you should, a prejudice act, or they should get a buy on it. I'm saying that the key to resolution and the key to healing is understanding the root cause. And when you do that root cause analysis, you can say, hey, this guy's this way because of this. Let me pour this into him and let's fix it, right? And so the same thing happens with boxing. You know, the root cause is critical and key to healing somebody or fixing somebody.
Andy, you want to add to that before I ask my next question?
No, I think he's dead on. I mean, you look at even some of even in team sports with football, they talk about that all the time. How many coaches leave Nick Saban and they go somewhere, and because they're, you know, highly touted, they always revert back to what's comfortable. So you know, in a boxing match, essentially, you know, you drill all those things into an athlete's head, but at the end of the day, when pressure comes and unnormal things happen, they revert back to what's comfortable. And so, yeah, a lot of times that's hard to overcome when you're trying to maneuver a certain athlete and get them out of old habits. You know what I mean?
What is it Tyson said? Everybody's got a plan.
Yeah,
to get in the face.
Yeah. Hey, let me add to that though. Muhammad Ali was my favorite, additionally, because of And there are other ones that did some of the same thing. Alexis Arguello in his home country went back and fought the revolution, and a lot of other ones. But Muhammad Ali, in a critical time, as a young kid, he stood for some of the things that were unpopular elsewhere. Conscientious objector. I really believe that, as a 26-year veteran, I really believe that his his beliefs drove his willingness to fight and against going to combat, opposed to being a coward. How you gonna say a guy that gets in and fights 15 rounds back then is a coward because he won't go to combat? And he probably would have, not probably, he would have played a lesser role like Joe Louis, some of the other champions that went to combat, where he'd have just toured around Vietnam or whatever and did appearances. He wouldn't have picked up a weapon and fought one day.
Well, real quick about that, Larry, because I think it's important in the world we live in nowadays, too, in a world where social media and the media has divided us. Like, if you vote one way, me and you can't be friends. That's what the world tells us.
Crazy. Yeah.
It's dumb because how are you supposed to get to know people? And anyway, but I wanted to say this about that point. We live in nowadays, I think it's more important than ever to admire, support, and respect people that differ from you in views, because you want that same thing when it's your turn to stand up for things you believe in. Absolutely. And if I'll hold Larry Bright's hand and say, hey, I'm with this guy, do you agree with him? Not necessarily, but if he's got the kahunas to stand up and say, this is what I believe, because down the road, I may need to stand up and believe for something. And I need people like Larry and Andy to stand up with me and go, hey, I'm not saying he's right. I'm just saying I support his right to say it and believe it.
I like to be known as the guy that reaches out to the polar opposite of what I believe in and tries to broker friendship and relationships with people. That's just, I'm proactive in that way, and I do that. I'm not naive. I see racism and I see a lot of other things, but it goes to that root cause analysis that I spoke of, that I can't heal my brother, will help my brother unless I give him insight into what I'm feeling, and I can't do that if I don't communicate with him. So,
well, it hurts you too. You miss so many friends and so many opportunities to learn. I've said this on a bunch of podcasts, and then we'll go back to boxing. But if me and you disagree, and I don't really know you, I just know this is different about you, and I label you a racist, then what that does, it does two things. First of all, you may not be a racist. I've just taken the lazy way out of the conversation. Second of all, I think it allows real racists to hide amongst everybody else. Because if everybody's a racist, then the real racists can hide amongst them. And what I want to do is the people that are like that, I think we should only use the words when they really apply, because then the real things that need our attention are easily seen by everybody, no matter what your political belief. That's my opinion. And I agree with you, man. I would have missed so many friends in life if I just said, you are this because we disagree, and I'm never going to get to know you and your kids and your family. Next thing you know, there's a lot of good people out there that don't look like me and don't think like me.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to show you this real quick because I love it when people participate. Glenn said, great show, Clint. Great guest. Thank you, Glenn. We appreciate it, man, very much. Thank you for jumping in. So let me make sure I get back to this. Fights you remember. Now, you like Muhammad Ali. I want to say this real quick. There's a couple of fights I remember growing up. And one of the fights is, and I've sent this to Andy before, there was, George Foreman. Most people nowadays remember George Foreman now as the big guy that's the grill. People don't understand in the 70s when I grew up, back the way when boxing was on TV free. And I got to watch great boxers on Friday night fights or Sunday afternoons on ABC Wide World of Sports. There was this fighter called Ronnie Lyle.
Yeah.
Do you remember the fight between George Foreman and Ronnie Lyle? I bet you I watch that fight 6 times a year. That was, if you want to see two big guys throw out the technical stuff, which probably would drive you guys crazy, and just stand in the middle of the ring. Do you remember Ronnie Lyle?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. He's a big guy.
Do you remember fights, though? Are there, like, for instance, I wrote down the Ward Gotti fights. Are there certain fights you remember and you like and you go, those were great fights?
So my favorites are, because I'm a boxing guy, opposed to a just like to see slugging and got two guys. You know, I like to see boxing, slipping, catching, stepping around, throwing combinations. That's what I like. So Sugar Ray Leonard was one of my favorites, man. And the Sugar Ray Leonard Tommy Hearns fight. I remember the town I live in now. I was stationed here as a soldier, and I remember going to the Von Braun Civic Center here and paying for the pay-per-view to watch that fight. It's an amazing fight. And the strategy in that fight, I remember, you know, like maybe the 10th round. It's probably about the 9th or 10th round. It's a 15-round fight, so it's probably about the 12th round. Don't quote me on that, but I remember Angelo Dundee telling Sugar, said, "You're losing it, you're blowing it, kid, you're blowing it." And Sugar went out, and at that point, you know, Tommy Hearns had that amazing jab and swelled Sugar's right eye up, you know, which I think later led to he had a detached retina later, and I think that's when it happened. But Sugar just went on the hunt, man. And he knew from earlier in the fight that he had touched Tommy Hearns in a certain way. And when he did, Tommy's knees kind of swaggered a little bit. And Sugar put that in the back of his memory bank. And so at the 12th round on, Sugar went on the hunt. You can watch him. He's got his left hand down, and he's looking for the left hook. And he throws it, and he misses, and he shakes his head. And that becomes evident that he's on the hunt now. And then he catches Tommy, and Tommy falls back like he anticipated. Sugar threw his hands up like, "I got him," and just started throwing combinations. Dropped him. But it was just technically one of the most amazing fights. And then another one with Sugar was Marvin Hagler. I preface it with this. I tell my kids all the time that the first thing you need to do, you don't need coach to do it for you all the time, but when you get in the ring, you need to look around at each one of the judges. And if you know the judge, then you know what the judge likes. Some judges don't like boxers. If we're fighting California or Texas, they like to go for it and throw a lot of punches, and they're going to give credit for that, whether you're hitting or not. So you know that you can't just sit there and sit back and box this guy all day. You got to show some forward momentum to win this judge over, right? The same thing applies to the Hagler-Leonard fight. If I got a big muscular guy, he's going to love Hagler. He's going to say Hagler won that fight. Me and Andy, we can watch that fight a million times. Sugar won that fight because he outboxed him. And when you watch,
by the way, real quick, Hagler won that fight, but continue on.
Yeah, see, I was thinking that at that moment about you, right? I was like, so when you watch the strategy in that fight where it was setting traps and Hagler fall into him, and he'd get off and move and leave Hagler hanging there, and he was winning the judges and winning the rounds at that point. So fights like that I like. And then the other one was I was always an Alexis Arguello fan. I resent when I still hate when Aaron Pryor knocked him out twice because he was such a great man. He was just an amazing human being. And he was a little guy, skinny guy, and I was a skinny guy. And he generated a lot of power out of that body frame. But those are probably some of my best fighters and my best fights.
Larry, can you allude to, and I tell Clint this all the time, I can't stress this enough, and I'm going to get Mike Vell on one of these because Mike actually roomed with him, but Vernon Forrest probably, if Vernon wouldn't have got murdered, he might have been the one guy
who
could have beat Floyd.
Yeah, he might have been. He as far as when you combine boxing skills with height, range, and everything, he was like had the structure of Terrence Crawford, but had boxing skills of.
I mean, Vernon absolutely beat up Sugar Shane Mosley.
Yeah, he
beat him up.
Sugar just never. Sugar Shane just never ever solved the problem called Vernon Forrest. He just never did. I mean, he was an amazing fighter. He really was.
Yeah.
You know, I remember this phrase, and you both can say it. And then I've got two more questions, and we got two comments, and I'm gonna let you both go because I don't want to keep you too long. But you hear this phrase all the time: from the announcers on fights, right?
Mhm.
They're, this fighter is getting the other fighter to fight their fight. I remember in the Hagler Hearns fight, because I like Hagler. I'm a Hagler fan. I like Hagler. I love his heart. But I remember listening to you're just going to go off screen now like this. Well, but I mean, I just love the fact he's willing to take one to give one, which is not a great philosophy. I can attest to that. You'll go home a lot of times and not remember stuff. But I remember the announcers a lot of times, if you're listening to good fights, you'll hear the announcer say, Hagler's getting Hearns to fight his fight, or Sugar Ray's getting Hearns to fight his fight. And I think it goes back to what you both were talking about earlier. When things go south, you kind of divert, you go back to what you're comfortable with, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I love the Hagler Hearns fight. I love those fights a lot because I like seeing they're so visibly different. I mean, there was just structurally, you kind of knew what each were going to have to do in order to win the fight. And it's imposing each other's will. And I love that fight. I wrote it down.
I mean, I think that to add perspective is that the opposite of that, the extreme opposite of that is a Floyd Mayweather fight, which would be like watching a chess match.
Yes.
Boring as heck, unless you're, into the scientific aspect of it.
All right. So let's do this. And then I'm going to ask you, we got 2 comments here. Joe Smith, ask these guys about Gene Fullmer.
Gene Fullmer never got, I think Joe's kind of dated there and he's going back. He's like, I know how to stump these guys on. I know how to stump these guys live.
3-finger Frankie from back to 1923. I don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah. We'll ask him about Jack Johnson.
But Marcus of Queensberry rules, that kind of stuff. How about this right here from Glenn? He chimed in. Mayweather versus De La Hoya is one of my favorites.
Yeah, that was a good fight. I mean,
you know what happened in that fight? I can tell you what happened in that fight. De La Hoya was piecing him up with that jab, and in the 7th round, he went away from the jab for some reason. And that's what cost him the fight, man. De La Hoya had him beat. He
had him beat, and then Floyd started touching him to the body too.
He did. Floyd slowed him down, I think, but right around the 7th round.
Hey, before
he's legendary. He's out of Utah. That whole family, Utah, Gene Fullmer. They're out of Utah. That's a famous family out of Utah. They're a boxing family. If you ever go to Salt Lake, I mean, when they hosted the Nationals. They're all over Salt Lake. So,
all right. So, real quick, do you have an opinion on the Tyson Jones fight that just happened? 2 old dudes getting in. What is it that Snoop Dogg said? It looked like his uncles were fighting at the picnic.
I think that it as a boxing purist, the first answer would be no, it was garbage, right? But then I started watching it.
Stop it, Andy.
And I got intrigued. I was like, yeah, I mean, as a boxing player, it was garbage. It really was. It was garbage. But as a boxing, but then when I started watching it, they were kind of clever. I mean, like Snoop cracked me up.
He needs to announce more fights, man.
He does. I mean, but he can't cuss the way.
No, he can't talk like that.
On Showtime, but yeah, it was pretty clever the way they did it. And Snoop was hilarious, man.
Yeah, he was, man.
He was hilarious. The lighting was different, the way
that
the
ring
lighting over the ring.
The ring was different.
It was a lot of clever things that they did that I kind of liked.
It looked like a video game.
It provided for an evening of entertainment, but it wasn't boxing.
No.
It wasn't.
Yeah. Well, and I'll say this. I said this to Andy before. I think, in real life, if they had Tyson never touched him hard. I mean, really with any intent.
No.
And so do you remember, are there any fights you remember, Larry, that you were in, or do you look back on your boxing career and are there a few people that you fought that you remember those fights? You're like, I remember that fight. I remember that.
There's a guy. I don't know where he's at now, but there's a guy named Johnny Bumpers. Johnny Bumpers fought out of he originally fought out of Nashville, and then he went to Tacoma Boxing Club back in the day when Coach Mustard and them guys was, Coach Mustard, man. And Coach.
I was with Coach Mustard in Rio.
I figured you knew him. Yeah, he's a legend.
That guy's a legend.
Ooh, Tacoma Boxing Club used to be fire, man. And Johnny Bumpers went there, but he's a southpaw. Fought him in the Golden Gloves once. Fought him in USABF once. And somewhere else a third time, and I never beat him. He's a southpaw. He beat my butt every time. So, yeah, I got some memorable fights there. But as far as perseverance goes, there was a fight, I think my first fight, Fort Stewart boxing team. I'll be brief. I was nervous. I got up in there. And back then, you could fight in the amateurs with no shirt on. Mm-hmm. So I was bony. And I always wanted to wear my shirt, right? And I couldn't get the shirt before, my team captain, his name was Bell. Get on up in there. And I got up in there, no shirt. And so the first round just went horrible. I was nervous. It was my first fight on the team. And coach just did the simple stuff. My opponent's coach seen my mouth open. He was from Florida. Seen my mouth open, said, he out of gas, touch him to the body. And he stopped me in the second round. So Coach Dorsey, the head coach of the Stewart team, had a thing where no matter what happened that week, when it was time to box that weekend, everybody showed up. You kind of had a feeling who was going to get.
I saw it. I saw it.
What'd he say? I can't.
You ain't never been bony.
That was uncalled for. So anyway, so
much for that
you knew who was going to make the bus by how you trained that week. And I just felt like, consider my performance 2 weeks before, and I wasn't going to make it. He said, Lil Man, called me Lil Man, get on the bus. I was happy initially. We got down to where we were fighting at. It was in Jacksonville, Florida. And I see this same guy that stopped me 2 weeks ago walking around. Only this time he's got a USA shirt on. I asked my team captain. I knew what that shirt meant. Team captain.
He was flexing.
Real nervous. He's like, what does that shirt mean? He said, it don't mean nothing, man, which was even more concerning. And I persevered in that fight, and I beat him. He ran out of gas in like the second round. Army boxers are always in shape, and I beat him. And I'll just never forget that as long as I live, man. That was over 40 years ago.
It felt good, didn't it?
It felt great. And so when I deal with these kids, when they overcome anything, just like I said, it's just, they could get the brakes beat off on my whole fight, but they land one good right hand. I know what they felt. I know the adulation that came out of that.
Well, we're about to wrap it up. And with that said, so is that, as a coach, Andy and Larry, at the end of a fight, is that your main? And I have another conversation a lot of times with a guy named Heath Esslinger, which Andy's good friends with and set me up. Heath was a college wrestling coach.
Larry knows Heath. We had him at boxing camp.
Well, so I talked to Heath about this. As a parent and a coach, looking for things you can improve is great. Imparting technical stuff is great. But being aware to find the good stuff that can build the confidence is important too. So if somebody lands that one good punch after the fight, you're talking about all the other stuff, but you're going to say that's a good punch.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Reinforce it. Absolutely.
That was a great punch.
What coach does, build on stuff. Yeah.
Tell me real quick. We all know what Andy does, and he said it when he came into it. Tell everybody what you do though right now, because you're out of the service, but do you still work in the military?
Yeah, I work for the U.S. Army. I work for DOD. I'm a manager of an engineering technology program on Redstone Arsenal. So I still work for the DOD, primarily in the field that I worked in, which is metrology, which is calibration, not to be confused with meteorology, but it's metrology calibration. The study.
I was about to ask you if it's going to rain, but go ahead.
And so that's what I do. That's my primary job now. But in the afternoon, I run a baby version of what, YCAP's a model program for the nation. We've told a lot of people that they need to come down and capture what they got going on at Chattanooga YCAP, bottle it up and sell it around the world, because they got the model program for the nation. Which I like to say something else. Give me 1 minute.
Yeah, absolutely.
I won't get out of line. I just think that with everything that's going on with the nation right now and the bad press that the police are getting, that I think that the police outlet, he talked about Mike Vale, and Mike would be a good one to come on this show. But I think that a police athletic league is a good way to overcome that barrier between our youth, our society in general, and law enforcement. Because police get a bad rep right now. There is a very small, but there are bad police, just like there are bad human beings. I mean, police force is a microcosm of society. And so there are bad police, but it's still a small percentage.
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, our police force and law enforcement are great human beings. And I just think there's a disconnect that goes back to Jim Crow and a lot of other things. And I think the way to overcome that is by establishing police athletic leagues. So I plan to campaign. I've advised the president of USA Boxing that I'm going to do it. And we're going to campaign and for boxing to take the lead on establishing police athletic league programs around the nation. So we're going to be a little different. So, you take a program like Andy. Andy's an established, well-functioning, funded program. All he'd do is engage the police, and they'd come in and interact with the children occasionally. So that would be an easy one. My program would be probably a second tier to the easy button, from the standpoint that the police would just come in and interface with my kids, assist in coaching. You develop that relationship where you realize that police officers are human beings just like you. And when they get behind you, if you ain't doing nothing wrong, you have nothing to fear. And so I just want to let everybody know that I'm going to be challenging people within the state of Alabama to get all my clubs into a police athletic league, and everybody within our LBC as well. So
you know what?
Ain't going forward.
Well, and I'll throw this in there. There's nobody that hates a bad teacher than a good teacher. There's nobody that hates bad preachers than a good preacher. There's nobody that hates bad police officers than good police officers.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Well, you've seen it. You mentioned it. Nobody hates bad boxing coaches, but more than a good boxing coach. When you look at what a coach is doing and go, man, you're killing that kid.
We do it all the time.
All right. So we know what you both are doing. I'd love to have you back on down the road and pick your brain about some more specific stuff. And Andy, I think now we might even try getting Chad on. I think we ought to watch one of these big fights and do a mini like Joe Rogan where they watch a fight and they don't show the fight on the video screen. We just sit and talk about it.
I'm telling you, if you could get me, Larry, and Chad on one to do one of those, it'd be high class material.
Yeah, it would be. The person that has a lot to say, if you look at your comments, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 comments. 4 of those comments are from Big Daddy Joe Smith.
Yeah.
And he's the godfather of the program, the youth programs that we got in our LBC. He's got a lot of wisdom. He shoots straight. So we can figure out a way to overcome his technology. Well, we need to get Big Daddy on.
We'll just put Joe next to his son on a couch.
That'd be great. Yeah.
We'll pull up Chad. We'll pull you up, and we'll talk. We'll talk fight.
That'd be great.
It'd be classic, Clint. We go way back, and Larry brings his kids every year to our summer camp up at Ocoee for a week, and we live together for a week. It's just good stuff, man.
I will say this real fast, and we'll wrap it up. If you've never seen or if you've never been involved in this, and Andy, and I know it's an old training trick, but when you see 2 young men or women put their feet inside that tire, put that front lead foot inside a tire.
That's rough, man.
Yeah, man. That's hey, we call it the dog pound around the gym.
Ain't nothing to play with, man.
Everybody put your cameras up. We're not filming this.
No.
There's no filming that. Hey, Larry, I know you're super busy, but this has been a lot of fun, and I really appreciate you coming on with me, man. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for all you're doing, and we keep it up. If we can ever help on the podcast is getting the word out about your program you're doing, reach out to me or Andy. We'll bring you and whoever you want to come on with anytime.
All right. Well, you might hear from me on this police athletic league thing. We're getting ready to spin it up real big. So
that'd be perfect.
And Clint, I think we may be on to something. And Larry can attest to this, but I think that I could even see USA Boxing down the road wanting to get involved in these podcasts. We could interview kids. We could interview Olympians. This thing could be big, man.
Well, here's what changes people's life, and this is what I know. You guys know boxing. I know marketing, and I know business on the marketing side of it. Stories is what changes people's minds.
Yep.
Headlines won't change my mind. You yelling at me won't change my mind.
Yep.
You proving me wrong. But once I hear Larry's story, first of all, I can't deny it. Second of all, it's hard not to be engaged with it. So the reason I want to do this podcast is because the only way I think to change people or to at least find some compromise in life is for other people to hear stories, because that's what moves people. That's my theory.
Yeah.
Bye, guys. Thank you, Larry.
All right. Thank you.
All right, Coach.
Thank
See you,
you.
man.
Love you, man. Love you
All right,
guys.
you too, baby.
All
Bye,
right.
everybody.